Hi, and welcome to Risk and Robots, where we navigate the future of risk. I'm Max Eber, the co-founder and CPTO of Taktile, and today I'm talking to Henrique Lopes, who's the director of data platforms at Nubank. Henrique is really at the forefront of tech advancements reshaping risk, and he's responsible for traditional rules-based systems all the way to LLM adoption at the world's biggest fintech. We talked about how to build AI use cases that actually deliver business value, how to avoid hallucinations, and whether AI will really take over all bank decisions eventually. Let's get into it. Welcome, Enrique, and thank you for joining us. Nubank is a leader in integrating actually helpful AI in banking. So would love to understand the first case you went live with.
I think like when we had the 2020 hype around like AI and with ChatGPT really changing the fields, I think the first areas that we invested on were around leveraging like this generative technology to accelerate migrations of heavy code bases that we had. So there was a lot of manual work on changing the code to upgrade it to new technologies. And we saw this as a first potential to both accelerate this work, but also use it as a way to learn and test these new technologies. I think we had pretty good run with those, and eventually we of course expanded that to like customer experience and actually putting those Gen AI products directly interacting with customers, both on a like reactive perspective of like them asking questions and having a better response and a faster response, but also eventually helping nudge our customers to certain actions and like quick starting that conversation from our side. And I think this is how we kind of enter the world of like leveraging Gen AI at Nubank.
What were some surprising bits when you launched it? I guess we were kind of early in this, and I mean, the models were not that good back in the day compared to what we have today. So what were some of the learnings from the early deployments when you unleashed this on the customer? Because that seems like a somewhat scary moment when you're introducing AI.
Yeah, I think it was nice to be early in that journey and also see how the technology progressed. Like I think our initial migrations, we had a lot of expectations, but we also learned a lot. Like in this first usage, how like prompt engineering was important, how like these tools would like derail from like the actual task if they were not very well guided towards what we wanted to accomplish, how much validation we needed to actually so I think we were learning, but also we were following as the technology evolved, because quickly some of the things that we needed to do at first became more of like a take for granted from technologies, and like we gradually increased to the point that today I think like AI based coding is becoming more of the status quo for engineering. Like at Nubank, we have a pretty good penetration of AI based coding, whereas in the beginning it was more used for specific migrations where the path that we needed to take was very clear. And I think it was very nice to see that evolution, and also the all the pitfalls involved in this process.
I mean, Stripe and some others, they have made a splash around building their own foundation models on very bank-specific data, namely transactional data. And I think in Stripe, the story was, hey, we trained our own foundation model on our transactions, which is very unique, very large source of data that nobody else has. And now we can use this to prevent fraud. And the results they posted were pretty staggering, actually. What's your take on that trend?
I think we actually went in a pretty similar direction. We acquired Hyperplane, a startup founded by Brazilians with a similar focus of like leveraging this same technologies, LLM, foundational models, and deep learning in general for the specific needs of like banking use cases. And I think we had a like we are starting to invest in similar areas of leveraging the vast amounts of like transaction and customer behavior information for our internal use cases. I think it's becoming clearer now that like this general LLMs that are very good for text generation are obviously not very good for specific tasks that are related to banking. And there's a lot of leverage in certain areas of creating our own models. So like product recommendation is one area that we're investing a lot on, like using this data to understand customer behavior and like nudge the different products that might be relevant for them. And for those, it's already pretty clear that like a external model would not be nearly as useful as like actually learning from the data that we have, from the targets that we have, and actually building it from scratch.
And I mean, recommendation is a very sort of established part of the literature. Recommendation systems have been around for a long time. I think going all the way back to very classical methods. How do you think about does everything have to be an LLM nowadays versus why are we not using the things that we know work well, and how are you balancing those two things?
I think the real power of LLMs and the way we see it is that it can learn from very unstructured data and like learn patterns of like sequences of transactions, for instance, and like data that before was very hard to input into the model. So I see it more as a way to learn from more data and have more leverage on the data that you have available versus a drastic shift on like the methods that you're using to actually do recommendation. I think a lot of the principles of recommender systems are still present. It's just that the technology to learn about the behaviors changes with LLMs.
I think a lot of our listeners will think about, do I need to train my own models? Do I need to fine tune my models? There was a period when the open source models were really hard. Everybody's into fine tuning your own models on your own data. Then the frontier models became really good, and we went more in the context engineering, prompt engineering direction with long context. Now with more big open source models, we're kind of going back a little bit more towards the fine tuning world. So, do you have any recommendations on when to fine tune versus when to lean on a, let's say, a vendor model that comes from one of the big labs?
I think that's a good question. I'd say it really depends. I think it goes back to like a trade-off on like the cost, the complexity that you want to put in your system versus the value that you take out of it. So like for simple activities where like you're leveraging this general knowledge for maybe coding like a common language that many people use or accelerating some type of workflows, you might be very well served by like a open source model. And I think even the activities that used to work in the past, like prompt engineering, became a big thing. But as this model evolves, the type of prompt is always changing and is becoming less about like providing a very small context, like providing a lot of information that it can leverage. Like the context size are also increasing. So I think this is an area that even how you do it is changing a lot. And then you go to other areas where, okay, maybe it's still good enough to have a general text model, but I really need it to be more precise to the business that I am working on. So then you would be investing a little bit more to fine tuning up to an area like we were discussing on banking, where like the context so different, like that using open source model makes little sense, and then you would probably go a next layer of actually investing, training your own models for those specific applications. And where you go from one to the other will really depend on like the cost appetite that you have, the complexity of the business, and really the incremental value that you're getting from going from one solution that's kind of out of the box already serving you to one that you actually need to put more engineering, more data, and more structure around the model.
Cool. I think that's a good segue to something else I want to talk about, which is knowing that the thing works. So if you build these use cases, I mean, how do you know they work, both before you deploy them and after you deploy them? How do you measure success? And how do you connect what you see in prototyping to the actual deployment with customers and ultimately business outcomes?
That's actually a great question because I come from like a ML background, and to me, I feel like the a lot of the same pitfalls that we had on like when like there was a belief that ML was kind of the solution for everything, because that we would often start to build ML models and optimize like the model metrics before even understanding how they connect to the business value and how do you actually evaluate success and how the model specific metric is related to your business outcome. And I think that is really similar to how I see problems that we're solving with AI. I think it's very important that there is a large investment in understanding how you want to use it, what is the business like success look like, how do you actually want to use the model for, like, are you actually taking an action on top of the model output? Is just this action like a conversation, or is it like a prediction on top of the model output? And understanding how this impacts your customer, so you can actually define how to evaluate the model and how that evaluation leads to better business outcomes. And ultimately, I think it also comes to actually ensuring that you're not only like optimizing a model metric and then putting in production and forgetting about it, but actually like running A/B tests, understanding the actual impact once these things go into production, and really being diligent with the evaluation of the model. Of course, I think there is a new dimension to generative AI, which there is like theory and like studies around it, but it's different, which is text evaluation. Like before, a lot of the model outcomes would be numeric things that you could like minimize. When you go to a place where you have like the text outcomes, I think it's a newer field where we're trying to understand how to go like you surely have the need for some manual validation of the text. You need to understand tone. You need to understand like how uh, summarized the answers are. So I think there's a lot of nuances to text. But in that, if you are able to connect those answers to a business outcome, you would be much better at understanding like the success of these applications.
Can you give a concrete example, maybe from one of the more popular AI use cases, like customer support or customer inquiries, where what you just said, I think, becomes a bit more tangible for people? So, what were the metrics you were looking at? How did you measure success in those use cases? What was ultimately the value? And maybe also some iterations that really boosted business metrics without maybe boosting the model metrics so much.
I think in Nubank we are very obsessed about like customer satisfaction. So I think that's like a metric that would always look like, regardless of like how accurate your model may look like on like offline evaluations, is that actually leading to higher satisfaction? And that has many nuances. Like a customer might be less satisfied just because it feels like it's being answered by automated text. Like I think there's some studies about like putting like a load on the answers because people feel more like well treated if there's a little bit of delay versus throwing an immediate message when they answer. So there's a lot about like the product experience that we need to think about, that we need to consider that as also part of the ML model and not only the output that's giving. And then there's like other metrics like the cost to serve, the time it takes for you to like solve a problem. So it will depend on like the business context, what is the metric that you want to optimize for. But ultimately, you need to be tracking those metrics and understanding how your models and the products around the model are solving the problem that you're trying to solve.
This reminds me of this case where I think some people optimized the UX of a product where they added additional latency when making a decision, basically because it felt like, oh, the company's doing so much work for me. So if it was too fast, it seemed too easy, too cheap. So basically, it
Exactly.
felt more premium for people if they had to wait for it.
The seams effect where you have like the loading and like it feels like it's really creating the environment for you. I think
Yeah,
that's
got
a
it.
good example.
And I mean, related question to this, which I think also a lot of people are asking themselves, is how much new stuff do I have to build versus how much should I just reuse my existing infrastructure that I'm using for other things like machine learning, statistical models, and maybe even rules-based systems. So, yeah. To what extent do you need to rebuild systems versus try to press everything into existing systems that you have today, especially around evaluation and monitoring?
In general, like Nubank was born as a very data-driven company, so a lot of the investments that we made on like good data infrastructure, good pipelines for data, having like a robust system where a deployed model, we already have like metrics around like operational stability, around like the performance, like from engineering perspective, about costs. a lot of these things are reused in the context of LLMs. But of course, I think there are like new things that we need to be concerned about, which bring like a whole new perspective. So in particular, I think there's a huge shift towards like higher usage of GPUs, both for training and for serving, that I think adds a new dimension in how like we run this compute. So we need to be even more diligent with like the cost versus performance trade-offs. And I think this adds a new dimension. And again, like the evaluation is one area that changes because you are like working with text. And even if you have automated metrics to measure, you still probably want to have a human in the loop validating the answers, validating the tone. And that is different from a more traditional predictive model where like the numeric answer would be sufficient for you to validate the product. So I think these are a few of the changes. And in general, I also consider that especially with Gen AI, the output is often directly interacting with the end customer, whereas like a machine learning model would maybe have more layers of like decision, of policies, of guardrails. And I think this changes a little bit how critical those AI systems are and like how much effort you put into controlling its outcome and monitoring its outcome as well.
How do you think about the risk of hallucinations, which tends to be a common objection when moving into more AI-powered automation or an AI-powered workflow?
This is an area where like there are two sides of this. The first is having like good criteria for measuring what hallucination means, which allow you to understand how your system is hallucinating. So like if you have some manual validations, you can like feedback your system back with the learnings of whether it is a hallucinating or not. And the second is the importance of putting like additional guardrails, either like prompt engineering or like a real guardrails around like forbidden areas that allow you to make your system more controlled. That's kind of how you would apply like a decision engine or a policy system to a AI model to make sure you guide it to the right direction. But again, these are like complex models, so you always need the validation, the monitoring, the evaluation side to make sure that if those happen, you're working to minimize them as well.
And you find that it has stopped you ever from launching a use case, or you've always found a way around it to guide the model better, and handle the problem, especially with the modern models and latest generation models?
I think it has definitely been an area of concern and an area that we need to kind of triple our evaluations before we launch. Like I think we are working with like sensible customer life relevant decisions. So whenever we're launching one of these automated AI systems, we always need to make sure that we are careful in how this is impacting their lives. And if these hallucinations impact and we have evidence that they can manifest in production, we'll always be uh, even more careful before launching to make sure we are not exposing our customers to such problems.
Cool. Zooming out a little bit, I mean, you've gone from a more data science, machine learning role to an AI role now, leading all the AI efforts at the bank. What are the things you took with you, or what are the things that come in handy now from that experience back in the day? I'm sure there's a lot of learning that you could carry over that made you more effective in what you do today.
Yeah, I think as I was mentioning, I think a lot of the fundamentals are similar. I still relate to the era where like there was a lot of efforts and importance given to ML, and I think like in that day we also learned how important the fundamentals around like data engineering, around like good statistical analysis, around like experimentation were, and I think it's very similar in the era of AI. Like of course, as I said, like the decisions are changing in types of behaviors. I think AI is more permeated on like critical systems. They are more closer to the end customer, so we are exposing a little bit more the outcome of the AI. But in the other hand, I think like the similarities in terms of having good data pipelines, have good in ways to detect issues with the data, validating that the outcomes of your model in production are similar to the outcomes of your model during backtests, having guardrails for the model outcomes to make sure they're aligned with your business needs. I think all of those are still quite similar to the techniques that are applied and still applied to the applications where they are a bit more ML or data science heavy in that sense.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I mean, how do you think about rules, models, AI? How will they all interplay? Because I mean, of course, we think a lot about rules engines, we think well about models, and also about AI. But I think it'll be in all of the above type of type of menu where people need to mix and match these things. But what's your view on how it's going to play out? Since AI tends to drown out every discussion about less sexy approaches nowadays, even though they are still pretty useful and powerful.
I would think about like two main dimensions for this problem. One is like about how data hungry the systems are in terms of how much data they need to actually learn and perform. And the other is around like how easy it is to explain what's happening. So I think uh, there will still be a lot of room for like good decision making engines and good ML methods, especially in places where like the data doesn't tell the full story, or you have like a highly regulated environments, or like the business is changing fast in a way that the data that you have doesn't capture the behavior that you were having. And in those areas, I think there's still a lot of value of having layers on top of AI or ML that allow you to add more explainability, more control, and basically adapt faster to changes in the macroeconomics, in the markets, in your business than you would if you needed like data to learn from.
So basically, you're saying there are things that you just cannot learn from the past because the future is going to be different from the past, or it's just things I want to impose because my strategy. So it's not something that I learn from data, but it's actually something I impose outside in, and that's where you want to, where you will have to use rules going forward.
Exactly. And I think in general, like places that uh the uh the data that you have is still not enough for and even if AI will be relevant, say like a few years from now, or when you have more volume or you learn more, let's say you're launching a new product and you need to understand the customer behavior to recommend it to some of your customers or to bring new customers. This is an area where you will probably start with a rule based solution and then evolve to a ML based with a rule based on top. And then eventually you might get to enough data and enough additional value where like going to a more complex solution, a more data hungry solution like a AI system uh, will be valuable. But I think uh, it's there will always be these dynamics of complexity and cost to be evaluated. I don't think we will ever get to a world where everything is like AI based on these decision processes.
You mentioned decision engines. What for you is like the top? What are the top aspects of a decision engine in the AI age?
Again, I think AI is bridging a little bit the gap in terms of democratization of these engines in the sense of helping analysts create new decisions faster. But ultimately, a lot comes down to how these engines connect the data that you have to actually making sensible decisions, how they help you back test, how they help you create sound experimentation strategies that allow you to validate in production, how they help you like monitor the decisions that are actually running to make sure you adapt fast. So a lot of like the same fundamentals that existed still need to be there. I think there is an era of changing the way this thing's done and maybe automating a bit more with like agentic workflows and like helping people create the code and reason about the data. But the fundamentals of what you need to be looking at and how the systems need to be uh, integrated into your decision making, I think they are still the same.
Cool. I mean, and if you had some like maybe last advice for risk and credit leaders who are tend to be the main audience of this podcast, and they tend not to be maybe pure play engineers, but they lead a risk function that needs to perform and get a business outcome done. What would be your advice in AI adoption? Yeah.
I think like to me the AI is like a inevitable technology that will permeate like the decision making world, from like helping like with productivity and with generating the decisions to actually changing the way we create the decisions themselves, the models. Uh, but they are not the only thing. I think like doing the fundamentals right is still really important. So not over focusing on AI and forgetting about like the importance of sounds, data, infrastructure, about good problem formulation to make sure you're optimizing a metric that is actually leading your business to success. To make sure that like you experiment with the different models that are put in production and the different decision process that you're putting to understand how this is actually affecting your decision, up to making sure you're monitoring the actual decisions and adapting fast to changes either to your product or to your portfolio or to the macroeconomics. So I think it's about leveraging AI where it makes a big difference, but not forgetting that you still need to have all the fundamentals in place to have like a sound decision engine that feeds itself with more value and allows you to iteratively improve like the business value generation that you're having from those systems.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks for joining us on Risk and Robots. To find out more about the future of risk, follow me on LinkedIn under Maximilian Eber. And to learn about how Taktile is powering next generation risk decisions, go to taktile.com, taktile.com.